I still remember the weight of silence that settled over the Hawthorne Hotel's grand ballroom that night. The crystal chandeliers cast their warm glow over hundreds of guests, all gathered to celebrate my father's retirement from First Harbor Bank. Charles Blair stood at the podium, commanding the room with the same iron presence that had built his financial empire over 3 decades. From my corner table, I watched him deliver what should have been a gracious farewell speech. Instead, it became my public execution. My legacy will be inherited by those who are worthy, he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Greg, with his sharp financial mind, Claire, with her exceptional medical talents, they are the embodiment of the Blair family's success. He paused, and I felt his gaze pierce through the crowd until it found me. My chest tightened as every head in the room turned to follow his stare. As for my youngest daughter, Evelyn, and her fanciful book publishing hobby, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. Sometimes, a bad investment needs to be cut. Evelyn, you can leave. Your presence here is unnecessary. The words hit me like physical blows. Around me, the ballroom erupted in shocked whispers and uncomfortable shuffles. I saw Claire's satisfied smirk from the head table, saw Greg sink lower in his chair, unable to meet my eyes. But what hurt most was the sea of faces staring at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, as if I were a child being scolded at a dinner party. I started to rise on unsteady legs, my face burning with humiliation, when Daniel's warm hand closed over mine. My husband stood beside me, his jaw set with quiet determination. Instead of rushing me toward the exit as I expected, he picked up his water glass and tapped it gently with his knife. The room fell silent again. "Excuse me for the interruption," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that made even my father pause. "But I just wanted to mention that Evelyn's fanciful publishing house just signed a contract to publish the memoir of an investigative journalist who has exposed numerous financial scandals." His eyes never left my father's face. "Mr. Blair, legacy isn't something you distribute. Legacy is the truth that people have the courage to tell. And we're just getting started." Daniel took my hand and together we walked through the crowd toward the exit. The silence followed us like a living thing, broken only by the soft click of my heels on marble. I held my head high until we reached the car, and then I collapsed. The next morning brought the storm. I was barely through my first cup of coffee when the calls started. Our largest distributor canceled their contract with Salt Light Press, citing some ridiculous clause about reputation management. 20 minutes later, the bank called demanding immediate repayment of our business loan. By noon, a vicious article had appeared in a gossip rag, painting my publishing company as a vanity project bleeding money and publishing sob stories from life's failures. Daniel and I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of what we thought was our secure life. "He's destroying us," I whispered, staring at the foreclosure notice that had arrived with the afternoon mail. Just like that, 24 hours, and everything we built is gone. "Not everything," Daniel said firmly. "He can take the money in the contracts, but he can't take what we've already published. He can't take the authors who trust us or the readers who believe in our books. And he definitely can take away who you are." That afternoon, my sister Claire called. Her voice held no trace of sympathy or concern, only the crisp authority of someone delivering an ultimatum. "Listen carefully, Evelyn. Dad is furious, and honestly, you brought this on yourself. Stop this ridiculous charade before things get worse. You can't win against him. You never could. Accept your place and maybe he'll consider letting you back into the family." "My place?" I repeated, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "You know what I mean. The grateful daughter, the one who doesn't make waves or embarrass the family name with failed business ventures. Be smart for once in your life." I hung up without another word. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of legal meetings, sleepless nights, and the gradual dismantling of everything Daniel and I had worked to build. We had to close the Salt Light Press office, packing our dreams into cardboard boxes with the efficiency of people who had no choice but to move forward. It was while cleaning out my desk that I found it, a small wooden box I'd inherited from my mother but never opened. Something about seeing it there, forgotten among the business contracts and unpaid invoices, made me pause. Helen Blair had died when I was 16, too young to understand the questions I should have asked, too grief-stricken to notice the strange way my father spoke about her contributions to the bank. Inside the box, beneath a few pieces of her jewelry, I found a small brass key in an envelope with my name written in her familiar handwriting. "My dearest Evelyn," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you need the truth. Find Eleanor Vance. She knows what I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Don't let him erase me. Eleanor Vance's law office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building that made me feel underdressed in my jeans and sweater. But when her assistant led us into her private office, I understood immediately why my mother had trusted this woman. Eleanor was probably in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to see everything. You look just like Helen, she said without preamble, gesturing for Daniel and me to sit. I've been waiting for this visit for 20 years. What Eleanor told us next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. First Harbor Bank hadn't been founded by Charles Blair. It had been built from the ground up by my mother, using her inheritance and her brilliant financial mind. Charles had been an ambitious young employee whom Helen had fallen in love with and eventually married. But as Helen's health began to decline in her 40s, Charles had systematically pushed her out of the company she created, manipulating the board of directors and rewriting the bank's history to position himself as the sole founder. Your mother was too sick to fight by the time she realized what was happening, Eleanor explained, her voice tight with old anger. And she was too proud to burden you children with the truth. But she was smart enough to prepare for this day. The key from the box opened a safety deposit box that contained documents I never knew existed. Corporate papers with my mother's signature as founder and majority shareholder. Financial records showing her initial investments. Board meeting minutes from the early days when she'd been listed as president and CEO. And most devastating of all, a nearly complete manuscript, my mother's memoir, detailing every aspect of building the bank and watching Charles steal it from her. This is why he's so afraid of your publishing company, Eleanor said as I flipped through pages of my mother's careful handwriting. He's spent decades making sure no one questions his version of history. But here you are, publishing other people's truths. It was only a matter of time before you found this one. 2 days later, Greg called me for the first time since the retirement party. His voice was strained, exhausted in a way I'd never heard before. Evelyn, I need to tell you something. Dad froze my accounts yesterday. Some lesson about loyalty. I almost lost the Morrison contract because I couldn't transfer the earnest money on time. I waited, saying nothing. I've been thinking about what Daniel said at the party, about truth and courage. Greg's voice cracked slightly. I don't know if I can be brave like you, but I can't keep pretending everything Dad does is right. There's a board meeting scheduled for next week. Dad's planning to make Claire the executive vice president, submit his succession plan before any scandals break. I thought you should know. The plan came together over the next week with the precision of a military operation. Eleanor handled the legal documentation while Daniel used his software engineering skills to create a presentation that would be impossible to ignore. Greg provided inside information about the bank's board members and their concerns about Charles's increasingly authoritarian management style. But the real weapon was my mother's manuscript. As I read through her words, I felt like I was meeting her for the first time as an adult. She hadn't been the quiet, submissive wife I remembered from my childhood. She'd been a visionary, a risk-taker, a woman who'd seen opportunity where others saw only problems. I built this bank to be a force for good in our community, she'd written, to help families buy their first homes, to support small businesses, to be a bridge between dreams and reality. I hope whoever reads this understands that truth is never lost, only waiting for the right moment to be remembered. The First Harbor Bank boardroom looked exactly as I'd imagined, all polished mahogany and brass fixtures, designed to intimidate and impress. Charles stood at the head of the conference table, presenting his vision for the bank's future under Claire's leadership. The 12 board members listened with the appropriate mixture of attention and deference. When the door opened and Eleanor, Greg, Daniel, and I walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What is the meaning of this? Charles demanded, his face flushing red. This is a private board meeting. Actually, Eleanor said smoothly, taking a seat at the table as if she belonged there. This is exactly where we need to be. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. Eleanor methodically presented the legal documents proving my mother's founding role in the bank. Greg, his voice growing stronger with each word, detailed the pattern of financial manipulation and family intimidation that had characterized our father's leadership. Daniel projected document after document onto the room's large screen, building an undeniable case for corporate fraud and historical revisionism. And then it was my turn. I stood at the foot of the table, looking directly at my father for the first time in months. He was no longer the intimidating figure from my childhood. He was just a man who'd built his empire on lies, and the lies were finally catching up with him. For 30 years, you've told the story of First Harbor Bank as if my mother never existed, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. You erase her contributions, her vision, her very identity to make room for your own glory. But legacy isn't something you can steal or redistribute. It's something you earn. I nodded to Daniel, who projected the cover of a book onto the screen. First Harbor, The Founder's Story by Evelyn Blair. The cover featured a portrait of my mother that I'd found among her papers, young and confident and utterly alive. This book will be published next month by Salt Lake Press, I continued. It tells the real story of this bank's founding, in my mother's own words. But I'm not here to destroy what she built. I'm here to return it to its original purpose. The room erupted. Charles was on his feet, shouting about fraud and conspiracy. Claire was demanding to know how we'd obtained confidential documents, but the board members were already huddling together, their faces grim as they calculated the legal and public relations nightmare that was about to engulf them. In the end, it took 3 weeks to negotiate the settlement. The board voted to remove Charles as chairman, effective immediately. Claire lost her promised promotion and eventually left to join a practice in another state. The bank agreed to pay a substantial settlement to me as Helen's heir, acknowledging her founding role and the financial damages caused by her systematic exclusion. But the sweetest victory came 6 months later, when I used the settlement money to transform Salt Lake Press from a struggling small publisher into a legitimate media company. I hired 12 employees, leased a beautiful downtown office, and established the Helen Blair Foundation for Underrepresented Voices, providing grants and publishing opportunities for writers who'd been marginalized or ignored. Greg joined me there after leaving his position at a corporate investment firm. It took time for us to rebuild our relationship, but working together to honor our mother's memory helped bridge the gap that our father's toxicity had created between us. The morning I stood in my new office, looking out at the city where I'd grown up feeling powerless and invisible, I thought about the woman I'd been just a year earlier. That Evelyn had been so desperate for her father's approval that she'd accepted crumbs from his table and called them love. She'd believed that her worth was tied to other people's opinions of her success. This Evelyn understood something different. Worth isn't inherited or bestowed, it's recognized and claimed. My mother had known her worth, even when the man she loved tried to diminish it. She planted seeds of truth that waited decades to bloom, trusting that someday her daughter would be brave enough to tend them. Daniel joined me at the window, our 3-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully in his arms. We'd named her Helen, of course. Any regrets? He asked softly. I shook my head, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the city skyline. Legacy isn't what people give you, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to the board that day. It's what you build with truth and courage. On the wall behind my desk hung a framed photograph of my mother from her early banking days, confident and determined and absolutely radiant. Below it, in careful calligraphy, were the final words from her manuscript. The truth is never lost, only waiting for the right moment to be remembered. I'd spent the first 30 years of my life trying to earn a place in my father's story. Now I understood that the real honor was continuing my mother's story and building one of my own that she would have been proud to claim.